And we shine at night. You're with Julian on the Brown Note. And will China bring peace to Ukraine? And the continued falling of the West as we completely ignore the largest global political paradigm shift of my lifetime. Since the Cold War, certainly. Well, yeah, definitely since the Cold War. So I did a piece ages ago called, I've done so many bits on Ukraine, but where is China? And saying that, you know, America and funneling of weaponry into Ukraine is the only solution to this conflict. Where is China? China has an opportunity here because they have a very different relationship with Russia to America or Europe. And they would have incredible influence, and they have no military interest or involvement in the proceedings. So there's an opportunity for them to actually step up onto the world stage and present a different world, a different one that is not based on militarism, but the soft diplomacy that they've been wielding around the world for decades now, especially in places like Africa. And then we had the China brokered peace deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran, which America has been amazingly silent on. Just an enormous geopolitical shift from one of their bastions in the Middle East actually turning to the peace table with China. And then we saw that there was, I think, a military practice operation in the Middle East with China, Russia, and Iran as well, conducting military exercises. The world's changing, and if you want a really good example of why we are being so, why the Western definition of us as the whole world is so out of whack with what's really happening. Currently, over the weekend of the 19th and 20th of March, Moscow held the second international parliamentary conference between Russia and Africa. Now, China has been involved diplomatically and financially in various African nations for many years now. This is no small thing. The president of the Russian Federation, Putin, stressed that Russia had always given and always would continue to give priority to cooperation with African countries. He added, Africa and Russia stood against neo-colonial ideology imposed by foreign states. He said, we are convinced that Africa will become one of the leaders of the emerging new multipolar world order, as there are all objective prerequisites for that. Our relationships with Africa have always been built on a disinterested basis on the principles of mutual respect and non-interference in internal affairs. For our country, the African continent has never been the subject of mercantile interest, the use of labour and raw materials. We cannot say the same about the United States of America and European states. So this has been attended by leaders from about 20 African nations. Again, good luck reading about it in the Western news anywhere, despite this being at a time when in the West we believe Russia to be an international pariah with no friends left. And then you've got no support virtually at all in Africa for anything that's happening in Ukraine. It's certainly not against Russia. We aren't the world, and we're being left behind. The world is changing, and at this moment we in Australia are choosing to double down on this militarized version of America. And so is the UK, and amazingly, so is half of Europe. But they might be just being, all we have to offer now is war, and the West isn't the world. And the rest of the world looks at this, and they look at the way that the financial implications of US and European Union help can often involve you giving up enormous financial sovereignty over your country as well. And there's a legacy of colonialism and previous wars as well. Now, China is involved. After I said that, where is China a few months ago, maybe they were working behind the scenes and they were biding their time. Russian leader Vladimir Putin has welcomed his most important backer to Moscow with pomp and ceremony. as Xi Jinping is pushing for peace in Ukraine. Upon the Chinese leader was greeted with ceremonial honor guard. Along with heaping praise, the pair were quick to touch on the business of their visit. Putin told Xi he had viewed China's 12-point peace plan for the resolution of the Ukraine conflict with respect. We have carefully studied your proposals for resolving the acute crisis in Ukraine. Of course, we will have the opportunity to discuss this issue. And I think I've got the points. These are 12 so these are the 12 points from China's proposed peace plan. 1, respecting the sovereignty of all countries. 2, abandoning Cold War mentality. 3, ceasing hostilities. 4, resuming peace talks. 5, resolving the humanitarian crisis. 6, protecting civilians and prisoners of war. 7, keeping nuclear power plants safe. 8, reducing strategic risk. 9, facilitating grain exports. 10, stopping sanctions against Russia. 11, keeping industrial and supply chains stable. And 12, promoting post-conflict reconstruction. So never has the West pushed for peace. All we've done is say we want peace by beating Russia. We want Russia to withdraw with their tails between their legs, and we're going to keep pummeling weapons into Ukraine. They never sued for peace from the start. We in the West could have sued for peace from the start, and it didn't need to happen. And we've never barely touched on peace. Our peace is we will defeat Russia on the battlefield. As we all know, that will likely result in the complete annihilation of Ukraine. But an awful lot of weaponry sold to all of the spooked out post-Soviet republics that are lining Russia's border, which has been happening. But there's also been this extra story that's been happening. The Americans have obviously come out and said no. Why do they get to say no? They said we don't want hostilities ceased until Russia retreats. So if you know that the war will go on for another year, why not engage in something that will stop it? I've blamed Putin for this war. I've gone through the history of why this war happened. I don't support right-wing dictators like Putin, but it seems very much like we're okay in the West with the destruction of Ukraine by pummeling the whole country with weaponry until every last building is destroyed, and then at the end we'll probably put a raft of egregious financial measures in place to reconstruct whatever's left of Ukraine. Whilst happily welcoming new countries into the NATO and EU fold and making them buy all the weaponry as well. So why don't Ukrainians get a say? I've virtually never heard anything that isn't hawkish from any voice that is Ukrainian that is given Western media support or promotion. So it's going to be very interesting because China haven't put any militarized version of peace on the table here. Ceasing hostility should be the number one prerequisite of any peace talks, and America is basically now saying we won't have a ceasefire until Russia leaves, which means that we won't have a ceasefire at all. So this is a really interesting new paradigm, and I think, maybe it's time for to hear from other voices in Ukraine. What do the general public think of China's peace deal? Let's ask them.